Hello and welcome to Middlebury 50. I am your host, Officer Chris Mason, and with me in the studio today, I am very excited to have my old buddy, Matt Reddy. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
And we've known each other for many a long year. We go way back.
Yeah, over 20 years.
Back to our misspent youth.
The exciting college days.
Right.
Yes.
We met at the University of Maryland.
We did during my my sophomore year, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is your second appearance on the show. So for those avid viewers of Middlebury 50, the die-hard fans who never miss an episode, your face will be somewhat familiar.
Yeah, they should immediately recognize me.
Yeah.
And
Well, probably they'll recognize you anyway from you being so famous.
Yes, I am.
Because you're a hospital commissioner.
I am. I'm an elected politician.
That's right.
Hospital commissioner in Jefferson County, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And been in office about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a bit of a, I guess I was called an internet activist, but I'd say I'm an activist. And I'm active in the Occupy movement before I was a hospital commissioner.
Yeah.
And
So does it make you uncomfortable being around a police officer in uniform?
no, not uncomfortable. I think it creates, anyone that knows me as an activist, especially anyone that knows me from the Occupy activist world,
Yep.
and other such activities and knows, that I'm starting my own podcast that is called The Mindful Activist, might be really curious what the heck I'm doing here with you and what the heck we're going to talk about, because there's a lot of police subjects that are very hot subjects in the world today in the U.S. So.
Yeah. Well, a lot of tension.
A lot of tension,
Right.
a lot of crazy events and confusion.
So if you were to think of us as archetypes, me being in uniform as a police officer and you the activist, those are very opposed archetypes, as they're generally portrayed or thought of.
I don't know if opposed is the word, but
there's some tension there.
There's
some
tension, some interesting contrast, in our life experiences,
right,
and in the groups of people that we associate with, and Although I am also, my life is kind of a tension because I'm an elected politician and an activist, and so those two worlds themselves are kind of a strange contrast.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel your identity is split as a consequence of that? Do you feel yourself divided?
Not my identity. I really just feel I'm an activist who's using politics as just a tool to try to, change the world in a better way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is strange to have when you run for office and you're a public figure, you have this public image. Mm-hmm. And I know some people are completely unaware of my activist side, and so they have this just public image of an elected politician, this hospital commissioner, and
you seem so respectable.
Yeah, and so they don't really
cut.
Yeah, they might not understand the activist part. So I feel very aware when I am bringing both of those things out. Mm-hmm. And kind of my activist side has been a little bit quiet the last 2.5 years while I've been in office. I've been trying to adjust to figure out what I could do as a politician. But it's starting to come back out. I'm starting to be much more visible in public with that side of me. And
right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often feel like there are these different aspects of who I am, and they collide in various surreal ways as I live my life as a police officer.
Sure. Do you have, what do you consider your identity? If you were to describe yourself.
I would say that it's a fairly fluid thing. I don't think of identity as a very fixed thing. I think a lot of people imagine that there's a core piece of who they are that is just fundamental and unchanging, and that they shift in various ways, but that's at the perimeter of who they are. That's at the periphery. But the essential self remains pretty consistent throughout their lives. I don't really hold that view. at least as it applies to myself. So I feel like I have deeper threads, more established aspects of my personality, but even some of those have shifted over the years. So who I am, my identity, is kind of what I'm absorbed in, what I'm doing in the moment. And there have been different chapters to my life for sure. And the most recent one involves me being a police officer, but that was not what I anticipated doing in previous chapters.
Well, what if you were going on to something like Charlie Rose or something? He's going to like introduce you.
I have no idea who that is.
Oh. Okay. I believe if I got Charlie Rose, a very famous interviewer on PBS. He has a very nice table like this. It's kind of what you're trying to be in some sense.
Thanks.
And you know, you
have to go and watch it. If this guy's like a total,
no, he's like, it's like a talk show.
You could be insulting me and I wouldn't even know it.
This is true.
Yeah.
I don't think it's an insult though. I mean, everyone. It's a mark of real, achievement to go get on Charlie Rose. He interviews politicians, and he does entertainers. He'll interview anyone. But it's kind of like going on a David Letterman talk show, except he'll interview for, I think, an hour sometimes, and he'll really go into stuff. But I'm just sort of curious, if you were going to be interviewed, would you want him to be like, this is Chris Mason, he's a cop. Is that, is that what you want to hear? He's a cop and he has a family. Or would you want to be like, because you were sort of like a poet, artist at some points.
Yeah. And sometimes I share my poetry as a police officer.
Yeah, on this show?
Well, generally not on this show. That hasn't come up. I could do that. I could do a poetry show one day.
That
would be
great
awesome.
Ratings. Yeah. I think people would love that.
That would draw the crowds in.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably most of the police department, everyone there would be really, transfixed by that.
They would. Yeah. Well, I started sharing my poems on I have a Facebook page, an official like Officer Mason Facebook page, and one of the things that I do with that is put up poems. And sometimes they're my own poems, and sometimes they're other people's poems. And I did get some feedback from other police officers within the department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They liked it.
We'll just leave it at that.
Well, it's mostly limericks, right? That's mainly what you...
Yeah, dirty limericks really is my specialty. That's
what I remember.
Yeah.
You're very good at rhyming,
That's right. Yeah. So my poetry tends to veer towards the existential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in my experience, you veer towards the existential.
I do somewhat.
I mean, we did meet as philosophy majors.
We did.
And so most of our early history is philosophical conversations about the meaning of life and how we are sure one day you're going to be a cop and I'm going to be an elected politician. That was kind of,
I think that was basically the gist of
we knew it all the time.
It was the writing on the wall.
Yeah, it's definitely what was going to happen.
So speaking of the meaning of life, what's the meaning of life, Matt? I mean, after all those philosophical conversations, mincing around in the woods of Maryland in the wee hours of the morning, contemplating life and your place in the universe, and all the things that you've learned after that, which, I mean, obviously that was the most fertile part, when you were spending time with me, but probably you've picked up a few things since then as well.
That was really the only time in my life I was really alive, and since then I've been sort of like a zombie.
It's just been a slow death. But now you're feeling a little more vivified.
Well,
it's
I'm
like
with you.
Reanimated.
So
yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, recently I've sort of been, I'm in the process of publishing a book that sort of goes on to some of these lessons that I've had over the course of my life, and I still basically believe, sort of as I did in college, and sort of in the spirit of like Henry David Thoreau, that life is about happiness, and that really is what every person. That's your fundamental challenge, is to figure out how to take this vessel that you're in and take it on a journey that helps you grow and flourish and be satisfied and happy with your life. And I think if you do that, you will, you'll help yourself learn, and you'll do things and you'll produce things that'll be good for the world and you'll help other people be happy.
Right. But that's not the goal necessarily. Like your personal joy is that.
Well,
and then if other people are made happy along the way, then so be it. But
right. Oh, you mean the goal is not to make other... Yes, the goal is...
Like, that's not intrinsic to it. You're just thinking, like...
Yeah, I just think it happens.
As part of the process
of
making yourself really joyful and enriching your own life and being...
Yeah. It's like you're...
full a person as you can be, that the people around you will experience some of that joy and be drawn along, be drawn into it.
Yeah. Well, and actually it's evolved beyond that too. I found that... what makes me, that really gets me excited and
really gets the juices.
Yeah, and really inspires me is
I
really
just like to
looking.
say juices. We'll probably probably use that word a lot
okay.
over the course of
I'll
this
keep it.
interview.
Yes, what really gets my juices going is looking at the world at large, and really looking at the state of basically happiness of people all over the world, and looking at that like a problem that I sort of find as a personal challenge to how can I affect that? How can I influence the way the world at large works, whether just in the U.S. or beyond the U.S. really? I mean, in fact, in a way I'm more inspired. I sort of look at, all the misery in the world and
all of it, every shred of misery.
Yeah, and so I sort of, there's misery in the U.S. There's miserable situations, but there's places on Earth that are really miserable. I mean, there's like, and that the type of stuff that we don't really like to say out loud. The horrible stuff that's happening in these war-torn countries and parts of some of the poorest nations on Earth. Right. Unspeakable things being done to women and children and men, of course. But I see that as it's like I want to figure out how do we make things better in wealthy countries like the U.S. and then how do we get our act together so much that we really are, as a country, as we interface with these really impoverished or war-torn countries, how do we really become a positive influence, that we are like we infect them with positive things, with really like elegant, rational, democratic principles and structures that we're really like helping spread good ideas that teach respect and teach economic and political decision-making systems that actually help these places become better.
I think a lot of people would argue that we don't have a particularly good track record attempting to accomplish that, because certainly the US in the past has tried to make the world a better place.
No, well, I don't think it has.
Imposing its will upon other countries. You don't think that's been the goal?
No, no. The U.S.
You think it's this bunch of evil people that are really just trying to make the world more miserable. You don't think they're No,
I don't think they're trying. I think they're
spreading democracy to other countries. You don't think that. I mean, as a stated goal, but you don't believe that that's what they're actually trying to do, is democratize other countries. I'm thinking like back through the the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
No,
when the U.S. was tinkering with other governments and taking out leaders that were...
No. I mean, if you look at... you got to look at like who is in charge, who's in power in the U.S. I mean, I have a video I put on my website that sort of describes the power structure in the U.S. like this pyramid, but not like a pyramid like this, but like this it's almost like a sharp squeezed pyramid, and
very spiky.
Yeah, it's almost like, and so to get up into the
kind
power,
of pyramid that you would really not want to fall on.
Yeah, like a
very
bad
much not
thorn.
So.
It's more shaped like a thorn.
Right.
And to get up in the power structure there, we have to. If we are honest with ourselves about how the political system in the U.S. works, it's not really a democracy. It's it's a very corrupt, money-driven system. It's like if you want to get up high in the political system, it's all about money. Who can you get to give you money for your campaigns? and probably some illegal money transactions are happening. But even without that, you need massive donations to become a powerful figure in the political system, and that means to get up here, you're talking to corporations and wealthy people, and the only reason they give you money is because you're promising to do something for them. And so it becomes this like constant negotiation and quid pro quo situation to climb up that ladder. And so, I mean, it's an ugly game, and I think the people that are drawn to play that game and to really get up into the powerful positions and that are good at that game, I think it's naive to think that they have these amazing motivations to help the world be a better place. They're playing a game that helps themselves, and they enjoy power. And I'm sure some of them care about people and care about society and the world, but power is a corrupting thing. I mean, the whole phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, even if it doesn't always do that, I think 60 to 80% of the time it does, and that means 60 to 80% of the people in power are pretty corrupt, and they're the majority over the ones in there that are trying to do noble things. So it's a mess. I think it's the way the U.S. has been making decisions about how it interacts with the world has been largely driven by the self-interest of the people in power.
Right.
So,
you see, I think that a lot of those people are motivated, are driven by ideology as well. Like, I don't deny what you're saying, like, even without getting into that and contradicting any of that. I don't think that ideology is necessarily opposed to that. I think that it's perfectly compatible with that, and would even add drive, add motivation to those other impulses. So I would presume that most of the people who have attained power, who have been really good at grasping power, who have been able to climb that slippery pyramid with the really nasty pokey point, ideology is a part of their makeup, a part of their frame. And when they look at themselves, when they assess themselves, they think of themselves as fighting for the good, as fighting for a better world. Now, I'd argue that often that's misguided. Like Imperial Britain, for instance, when it was spreading its influence across the world, subduing the savages in Africa, I think a lot of those people perceived themselves as spreading civilization to these far-flung, remote locations, and that being a very positive thing, that they're helping them to become more British, more refined. So it was, when we look back on it, when we look back at the spread of imperialism, it seems really horrific, the massacres that took place. And it to our sensibility, to our modern sensibilities, it is horrific, but I think a lot of the motivation was to do good and make the world a better place, to have a positive influence. So just bringing it back to that initial motivation that you were talking about, you know, when you were describing your vision of combating the misery around the world, making the US more enlightened, a more beautiful place, more of a beacon of, you know, hope and positivity, and being able to spread that to other nations. It's hard not to think of that in imperialistic terms. It's like all the models that I have for imagining that come from, you know, the CIA in Nicaragua, or England in India. Yeah, that's the framework I have for a nation trying to make another nation a better place.
Right. Well, I don't think I don't necessarily think it would be by the nations doing it, right, but the pockets of wealth. You know, it's like I think that's one of the problems with these pyramids and climbing these pyramids of power is once you climb up it, you now have because you spend so much time climbing this power pyramid, you have an interest in keeping this power pyramid basically in place, keeping the U.S. as a nation state, and keeping it as an identity, protecting it from, I mean, that's a lot of what happens when you're in power. You're thinking, what can I do that's good to protect my country at the potential expense of other countries? So for me, I look at it as the wealthy people in the world need to be thinking about how can we make the world a better place. It doesn't matter what nation you're in. And so one of the things I think can happen is that that we can use the internet, which has connected the world in ways that it's never been connected before. You know, in the history of humanity, the last 50 years, we have suddenly created a world where people all over Earth can communicate and connect and potentially start making decisions together in a way that it was never possible before. And I think if we figure out a way to do that better, then we actually can just sort of start creating a human decision-making matrix or structure that is completely new, completely separate from these power pyramids that are all over Earth. We can create this really broad decision-making power structure that could have a lot of influence. You know, not necessarily tearing down these other pyramids of power, but maybe actually able to tell these pyramids of power what to do. You know, if there was, say in the U.S., if everyone or the vast majority of the people in the U.S. were actually connected online and able to really, instead of relying on polls, you know, currently that's how politicians, they stand up there in their power position, they let the CNN or whatever do a poll of 1,000 people on some major issue, and they say that somehow tells them what the country wants. And they use that as a way to convince people that they're listening to the country. But what if everyone in the U.S., instead of 1,000 people, actually 1,000,000 people actually just said what they wanted, and they were able to do that quickly, not like a poll every few weeks, but like every day they could just say what they wanted, and they were communicating. It'd be very, very hard for the leaders to ignore that. It would, instead of these polls being a tool that a politician can pull out when they want to listen to some poll, it becomes the will of the people is actually like clear and said, and it becomes very, very difficult for a politician to just blatantly ignore that and just pay attention to other influences that are trying to get them to do their bidding.
Right.
So.
If it was rendered that explicit, then them ignoring it would be a pretty clear indication of...
Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm trying to build. That's one of my projects is...
So it's a communication vision and a clarity vision, transparency.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to create a mass decision-making platform for millions or billions of people to do that, to communicate and say what they want, and have it be a reliable and trusted way to get an idea of the will of the people. Yeah.
It seems like we're moving in that direction somewhat. That national identity, it's been such a significant part of politics for such a long time, in the whole modern era. I mean, since we've moved away from kind of nation states, I guess, from city states, as we've grown into countries, that's really dominated politics. But we're slowly kind of drifting beyond that. I know there are polls that have been taken, talking about polls, but focused upon young people in particular, and their sense of identity politically is much more global now. They don't think of themselves as primarily US citizens or English citizens or French citizens or whatever it might be, but they think of themselves as citizens of the world. So that trend is translating into how people think of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think in a way it's inevitable. I think potentially technology, I mean, we're the only technological civilization we know about, humanity, but if we could study, you know, I can imagine different technological civilizations on other planets or throughout time. It may be inevitable that they develop a technology that connects everyone on the planet, which over time really wears away the concept of whatever nations or tribal, situations they created in their early history, and eventually it becomes a very global identity.
Sure.
Although I imagine if we like colonize Mars or the moon, those will probably end up being the new, I can imagine pretty big identities being revolved around your planet.
Right. Planetary
Earth
identity
versus
right.
Martians versus lunars.
Sure.
Yeah. But we're nowhere near that.
Right. I think a lot about community. That's a big part of my kind of professional life, but it's a big part of how I think about things, how I perceive things, generally, on a broader level. So, what you're talking about essentially is creating kind of a global community, and maybe that already exists. So, kind of harnessing that and expanding it maybe in some directions.
Yeah, it is, with the social media networks, Facebook right now being, Facebook and Twitter, I suppose, being the two biggest. Those are the beginnings of a potential global community, but they are, in places like Reddit and YouTube, but they're not made to the people that the architects of it. They're not motivated by trying to make the world a better place primarily. I mean, they're corporations. They are motivated to serve the interests of their shareholders, which is to make more money. So it's so I don't think we're gonna get out of corporate profit motives the type of platform that really connects humanity in a way that really serves the mass population's interests. It's always going to be a web of connecting people, and then how can we squeeze this web to get money out of it? And how can we squeeze it and move the people so that they buy certain things so we can get more money out of it? I mean, that's right. So I think it's going to be, some sort of open source some sort of open source egalitarian development system is going to have to come up with a way to create the platform that really takes humanity where it could go, to have a much better decision-making system. And maybe it's not inevitable that we get there. I mean, we could probably go a very long time with some very bad, systems.
And things could really go off the rails.
Yeah. And even a good system can be corrupted or, co-opted by bad actors.
Right.
So it's going to be the next 50 years, a very interesting time for us.
I think that's for sure.
Yeah.
So clearly there are a lot of things that are preventing people from being happy. These broad things, some of the things that you were touching upon earlier, torture, massive oppression.
Yeah, basic necessities, basic freedoms.
Right,
yeah.
People not having access to clean water, access to even rudimentary healthcare, access to education and other enrichment opportunities. Real economic hardship where you're living in houses that are tiny and unsanitary. I went to India. There was a place where all these houses along the side of a river, and they were beaten out of old oil drums. So they took the drum, I assume they contained oil. I mean, who knows what was in them? Could have been something even more toxic than that. And they were flattened out into sheets, and they built these little huts out of them along the river. And they were probably about the size of half of this studio, the whole, and there would be families living in these houses. Clearly, no plumbing, no basic amenities, things that we take for granted in America. I think that's how a lot of people in the world live, in these conditions that we would regard as just horrifically tough. So those things, maybe not always, but often would get in the way of people experiencing joy. So, a core aspect of your mission, your ideology, your vision, what drives you is to remove some of these impediments. But what is joy? Like, what is it that gives you, like, those are the negative things, those are the things that are standing in the way, but But what is happiness? Do you experience happiness if you just get rid of all those things? If you have all your needs taken care of, you have clean water, enough to eat, shelter, are you then happy? Or does happy have a positive component to it? Is it something that you actually have to reach for and strive for?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, having your necessities taken care of is, it's not a, it's not a key, not a guarantee of happiness. I mean, I think happiness is much more, it's a very subtle thing. And in a way, you're really, I mean, you are ultimately incredibly limited to how much you can affect the happiness of another being. I mean, if you have, I mean, lots of people have family members who have money, have jobs, but there's so many things that can make you miserable. So many addictions or other or fears or just the desire for love and companionship and not figuring out how to satisfy that. I mean, those are. It's almost like there's, well, the way I've talked about it is there's an internal world and an external world. And in the internal world where you're, which is, I actually think it is more important than the external world, what's going, and it's really the place that you have the most power. But the internal world, you're largely on your own for how you figure out what will it take to make myself actually feel good about life and feel good about the world. And the tools and activities you do to try to deal with that are very different than in the external world. And for me, it's meditation is sort of my primary tool for sorting through that, for exploring that, looking at what's alive in me, what forces are going on, what things feel out of place or discontent, and trying to then figure out what can I do or change to make myself feel happier about life. And really that process is what drew me to activism. And it was, but not in the sense that if I can help everyone on earth have clean water, it'll make me happy. It was just sort of an extension of the things I was doing that were making me happy.
There's a broadening of that.
Yeah, and it's also about connection. It was about, because I think part of happiness is you see other people that are like maybe not happy, but they're fired up about life and they're doing things that are interesting. And then if you join forces with them or you connect with them, you sort of it's still almost kind of selfish. You're still sort of like feeding off their joy and energy. And it's like feeding you. But a lot of the people
doing it sounds so vampiric.
Well,
sucking the
energy from. It's very mutual often.
Right.
I mean, people aren't
symbiotic.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic thing.
Like slime molds.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't have a problem with the vampire analogy. It's like
they get a bad rap.
Yeah. I mean, you're feeding off the energy of others, but I mean, generally, it like you're giving back energy.
Eternal
and you're giving
life, right? Surely that's a pretty good trade-off.
Well, I don't really see how that metaphor, that part of it, doesn't really.
We might be drifting.
Yeah, we're drifting a little bit.
We're drifting. Yeah.
Although, what are you talking about? Yes.
One thing that I find positive, something that I've thought about a lot is, here we are in this nation that is astoundingly wealthy, just astonishingly rich, the U.S. I talk to my daughter about this a lot. I have a daughter who's 12 years old, and it's come up frequently. And I've done a lot of traveling to third world locations. I've seen a lot of really severe poverty. So I try to tell her, you live in a really rich country and you are really rich. She's like, we're not rich. We live in a 2-bedroom condo. I know people who have these really huge houses and have pools in their backyard. We're not even remotely rich. You know, we're barely better than poor. Is her perspective. So I try to convey some perspective. Like, yeah, you know, there are people who are richer than us in the U.S., but on an international, you know, level, we are fabulously rich. And there's even, you know, there's charts you can find on the internet that will gauge your wealth and give you a percentage, you know, internationally. And I think we're like in the top 1% of wealthy people internationally. So I bring this up on my phone and I show, look, you're top 1% most wealthy people in the world.
Yeah.
You know, you need to stop whining about there being nothing to eat in the fridge.
I'm sure that works really well.
Yeah, she's like, oh, this is just total nonsense. I refuse to believe this. But we're astoundingly rich, and there are people who definitely are not doing well. People who are really struggling, and as a police officer, I interact with a fair number of those people professionally. So people who are struggling with really severe mental health and maybe not getting the treatment that they need, or other medical issues. People who really don't have enough to eat. People who are grappling with addiction issues, or children in those households whose parents are grappling with addiction issues. So these are real severe problems. But generally, even if you're fairly poor in America, generally, you know, you're probably going to have enough to eat. You're going to have a place to live. You're going to have a fairly kind of clean, sanitary environment. You're going to have access to education. You have these things. So it seems like in the US, we should all be like blissfully happy. And we have these things. You know, we're living in the promised land. This is the land overflowing with milk and honey. We have everything. I know I have everything, and I'm not considered wealthy by American standards, but I have everything I could need. I don't want for anything. Yet it seems like in the US there's an epidemic of misery.
Yeah.
It seems rare to encounter somebody who's like, yeah, you know, I'm totally blissfully happy. And nobody's going to be blissfully happy all the time, but even to encounter people like, yeah, you know, generally, I feel like I've got it really good, and I'm joyful. There's so many people struggling with depression and chronic anxiety. And why? It doesn't seem like there's any connection at all between having the wealth and experiencing the joy, almost. Is it?
I wouldn't say there's no connection. I mean, if you don't have the necessities of life, you're at a massive disadvantage. And if you don't feel safe, you know, going out of your home, or if you have violent oppression in your world, I can't even imagine how hard it is to, you know, have a happy life.
But it seems like depression should be a rarity not depression, because depression is a condition, it's a clinical condition, but being miserable should be, you know, this wild exception.
I don't know. I just think, I mean, life is hard, you know, and it's like, I think it's
like the student. I interact with a lot of, I'm a really bad interviewer.
That's good. You're doing great.
I spend a lot of time with students. I'm a school resource officer, so I spend a lot of time in high schools, and I talk to a lot of students. And what I hear over and over again from students is, school, it's such a hateful thing. It really sucks. It's like being in prison. Yeah. They draw that analogy again and again and again. It's like being in prison. And when you think about that in kind of international terms, comparing it to the deprivation in some of these countries, and you think about what actual prison, yes. You know, all these adult, and I work in Middlebury. I interact a lot with the teachers, with the guidance staff, and these are adults who are dedicated to enriching the lives of their students for the most part. I mean, some of them are kind of, you know, a little bit burned out and maybe don't have as much drive as they could, but for the most part, these are gifted individuals, intelligent individuals who have a lot to share, who are committed to making their students' lives better and richer. Yet that's the perspective, that's the view that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it comes down to your internal world, and it's just your internal world is so it's such a challenge to figure out how to deal with our emotions, how to deal with our desires and our fears. And there's different solutions societies have come up with to try to help big populations navigate that.
Right.
You know, and organized religion is one solution that has, I mean, it does have some things going for it, for making a population of people, you know, deal with their internal world, but it's very authoritarian in telling people this is what all these things inside you mean, you know, or this part of what you're feeling means God is talking to you. I mean, but there's a reason it's used, and it has been used throughout history, because it can give people a structure for how to deal with their internal world and tell them, well, this is what the meaning of life is, this is what the path is, this is what you should care about, and actually tell them you're happy because you're doing this, this, and this, and you're going to go to heaven. But, you know, in our modern age, organized religion, at least in the U.S., is, it seems to have become, at least for a portion of the U.S.,
Right.
it's become far less powerful. And so people are now, you know, now it depends, what do they use instead of religion to figure out how they navigate this stuff, and how do their parents have a way to really teach them how to navigate your internal world.
I mean, there's still a lot of deeply religious people, and there's certain parts of the U.S. where a large proportion of the people are deeply religious, and there are people who are deeply nationalistic as well. I think of these things, we were talking about that before, but these are things that provide a lot of identity, a sense of identity, a sense of meaning in people's lives. And I think you're right that for a large segment of the population, these things are no longer relevant. They don't have as much force as they used to have, or no force at all. They're really failing to...
But I mean, what it really comes down to, I mean, the challenge of every human life is you have to figure out what's actually important.
Right.
And you might have religions telling you one thing is important. You have maybe nationalistic, you know, people telling you this is what's important. And you have, you know, every friend, every person you know telling you what is important. And you have to actually decide what is important. And it's, you know, if you're not going to just surrender the authority on of that decision to another person or organization, and just say, I'm just going to trust this book or this person to tell me what's important, you're going to take the weight of that on yourself to decide what's important.
Sure.
Then, I mean, you're at the point every, you know, existential philosopher that's ever lived in trying to figure out what the heck is life about, what's important, what's going to make me happy, and how do I get there.
Well, that's the essence of existentialism right there, is that struggle to generate meaning without relying upon authority.
And a lot of those existential philosophers were not incredibly happy.
No, they don't come across as such. No,
no, they did not seem. I mean, that's why
there's a lot of angst.
Yeah,
that's kind of the character of the literature and the philosophy.
Yeah,
but there's heroism there too, because you know that it's
and honesty. They're really like saying we are trying to be honest, and some of them were like, we honestly believe life sucks, and it's absurd. Everything is meaningless. And some of them, I think, sort of then went from that to, well, therefore, life can be anything, and we can define its meaning. I don't know how well they embodied that in their actual lives, because
You didn't know them personally.
I didn't know them personally.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons.
Hang with Camus? Or
No.
Dostoevsky was a little before your time.
Yeah, and Dostoevsky didn't come off as incredibly happy to me.
No, not the best dinner guest.
No. But the one who did is Thoreau. That is one of the reasons I love Henry David Thoreau, because it's almost like you have to like just take as a premise that life is a gift, and it is an amazing, glorious gift. It's like, and I'm going to try to suck the marrow of life. You know, it's like, it's, you know, whether or not that's, you know, I mean, it's almost like a thing you take on faith.
It's like sucking the juice out of life.
Yeah, it's all about the juice of life.
It comes back to the juice. Like, But if you wanted advice about how to be happy, right? If that was something you were genuinely going to somebody seeking advice on that, like, it wouldn't make much sense to trust the advice of somebody who's miserable.
Well, yeah. Well, of course.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I'm drawn to writers that clearly are like, they're happy, or they're showing joy in what they're doing. And I kind of feel like fundamentally, and this is something that does come up, in meditation, and you think about like being mindful in a moment with someone,
Sure.
or in any moment, you always have a choice of choosing a more positive outlook on the moment, or choosing a more optimistic. It's like I could be talking to you and being like, this is so boring, this guy, it's like, man, he's droning on and
All
on.
the viewers are like, damn, yeah, dude,
Yes.
I'm with you.
Yeah. But the beauty of this moment is I
can't believe he's still talking and he has that annoying accent.
Yeah,
And,
he keeps interrupting the really interesting
yeah,
guest.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing about the present moment is that the present moment is like, it's like a moment of magic. This conversation could go anywhere, and even if you are doing everything you can to drive this conversation into the most boring area possible, I'm here too.
I just want to get back to the juice. Yeah.
Well, see, maybe you don't understand what the juice really is, and I have a better idea.
Probably.
And I can use what I say or not say to try to, and I can be optimistic about it. I can say, like, there is potential here for a really interesting interaction. There is potential here. I could learn something from this moment, and and that's a choice. I mean, it's a choice to say, I am going to take my attention and look at the window towards something better in this moment versus the window towards all the bad places it could go. It could really, the universe is almost always split in two. There's always a better direction to go and a worse direction to go. And if you're focusing on the worst direction and just like fretting that and regretting it the whole time, you're going to go where your attention is. So if you just say, and it may be that the best place for this moment to go is for me to get up and leave. And if that's the case, then you can get up and leave. And that's a great, I could do that if I was like really irritated, or I felt like there was nothing to be gained from this. But
but there's potential for something sublime.
Yeah. And that's what meditation, that's one of the things it's a basic thing of meditation. It's just like, where's your attention? Is your attention, they teach you to train on your breath or look at a candle or whatever, but that's really just teaching you, take control of your attention. Are you going to pay attention to the subjects that you don't want to go into and talk about? Or are you going to try to see through the fog of what's going on? What do you want to talk about? What is interesting? And then there's always a choice of whether or not you talk. It's like a great way to reclaim what's going on in the moment is just to shut up.
Yeah.
And you don't have to respond when someone talks to you. And
so I think we should just sit here in silence. And
yeah.
For the next 15 minutes.
Well, that's something I'm going to do on my podcast. It's called The Mindful Activist, but we're going to talk about activism. But when I interview people, like this, one of the last interviews I did, I told this young woman I was interviewing that don't feel rushed to answer my question. It's like, I don't care if we have 2 minutes of silence while you really think about what you want to say.
Sure.
But it's so hard to do that when the camera is rolling, because it's like, if we sat here for 15 seconds of silence, we'd both feel like there'd be like a rebellion. Everyone would turn off the camera. No one would watch anymore. The awkwardness would just like rise and rise and rise.
Yeah.
But I think awkwardness is like a pathway to growth. If you think about, if you're like a tree, there's growing pain. Awkwardness is just a type of growing pain. So I think there's actually great potential there in awkwardness. We shouldn't be so afraid of it. It's like, should like sink into it.
Channel our middle school selves.
Yeah, well, you're growing a lot in middle school.
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
awkward moments.
Well, again, I mean, talking about silence though, like I think of our relationship. our connection together. And I think of my path to happiness. Happiness is also very important to me. I think it's something that we share as a basic kind of outlook, that basic perspective. And a lot of my first forays into joy.
Sorry, were you talking?
Like he's going to start talking about juice again.
Yeah, I'm still with you.
They were very solitary pursuits. Bringing that silence into myself, that kind of empty space, and then expanding outward from there. And one of the great things about the connection that I had, it was a bit romantic when we were back in college. I mean,
Yeah, it was like total Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
But crusty.
Crusty Bill and Ted, that's what we, because we didn't shower much.
Right. So we go for long hikes out in the woods at night. And we would talk a lot, for sure. We would share our ideas. We were excited. We were young and very enthusiastic. But one of the things that we did a lot together was just be silent. We spent a lot of time very quiet together. And it's rare to be able to do that with people.
Have comfortable silence with someone is, it's such a gift. I mean, but if you think about that, it's like, what does that say about if you're in the bubble, the social bubble with someone, there cannot be silence. One of you has to be talking, you know? Right. And then there's like this obligation that you have to be listening to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, and there are some people they're like, if you're in the bubble, there has to be talking or communication going on, and they get very upset if you are not responding to their social cues appropriately, you know, and they genuinely, then they start to reinforce and change your behavior. And you have to then decide, am I going to comply with their expectations? And so it becomes, when you're in their bubble, you're like, oh, I'm complying with social expectations, and it's such an uncomfortable situation.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it is magical to have a friendship or a relationship where you can talk, or when you could just stop talking and be silent for a long period of time, and then start talking again, you know, and pick up on some thread. You know, it's like we would have different threads going, different topics, and never knew which thread one of us would pick up.
It's exciting.
Yeah. It helps to be doing interesting stuff together, like walking through the woods or sitting by a campfire. I mean, if you're just sort of like sitting in your dorm room or something, you know, it might be different, or sitting out in public or something.
Yeah. So is there any moment that stands out as iconic? Like when you think of joy, is there an image that flashes through? I mean, I know there have been so many moments, so many interactions with beauty, and times when you've drifted into this. I've been there for a lot of those moments where you've drifted into a deeper sense of the sublime. But
I would say,
is there one that's really iconic for you?
Well, to me, it's dancing.
Right.
I mean, dancing, I think, it's a great metaphor for life, and it I think is actually one of the most enjoyable activities in life, whether it's dancing alone or dancing in a group of people. And I mean, another that comes to mind is doing art, you know, when I really have gotten absorbed in doing a painting or something. And often I'm doing a lot of dancing while I'm doing it. I'm listening to music and I'm painting, and then I dance around the room, or and actually it seems actually like the best times in my life, usually, you know, whether it's writing or even like computer programming, I often will take dance breaks, because I feel if I feel the joy of life, then, you know, it's like you have to have your entire body like dance around and move, and then while you're dancing, it like helps the brain work and helps you think through stuff. Right.
I like dance as a metaphor because there's a degree of control. There's a rhythm to the movements, to the way that you're moving, the way that your body is responding to the stimulus. But there's a degree of chaos as well. So it's this mixture, this organic kind of combination. And when it feels really good, you hit that kind of sweet spot where those two things are perfectly blended. I love that about art as well. Like when I'm creating a painting or a poem, like there's a part of me, even a poem, which is fairly using language. There's a part which is really well thought out and very conscious. I'm trying to express a particular idea, but there's also an aspect of it when it's good where it feels like the words are coming from somewhere else, and I'm making these bizarre connections on different levels. And so this kind of intersection of the controlled and the chaotic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's why I prefer the sort of like the free form,
Mm-hmm.
chaotic dancing as opposed to very structured,
Right. It's not
forms.
like ballroom dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although
Although I would like to see you in the outfits.
in the ballroom dancing
absolutely,
outfits.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure I'd look good in them. But there's a form of dance I've been learning called fusion dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of that?
No.
It's basically like they've taken swing dance and all these other forms of partner dancing,
Right.
and they've fused them all together,
Mm-hmm.
but they just basically create a couple rules, a couple like basic guiding principles, and so
Mm-hmm.
you and your partner know these basic guiding principles. Again, you can do whatever you want,
Mm-hmm.
but you have like these subtle little hand signals and stuff to lead into complicated, swing dance and
Sure.
lifts and all sorts of stuff. And so,
Yeah.
that's another thing I've been exploring.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
It's been fascinating chatting with you. I feel
Yeah.
even after having had so many conversations in the past, just sitting down and talking with you now, there's things to discover.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's so interesting how the camera affects. It's like it creates this energy of what are we going to talk about
Right.
while we're being potentially listened to by your 10 or 20 people that watch this show.
That's right. Yeah. Literally in the tens.
Literally in the tens of
Yeah.
people. Well, and I'll share it on my website,
Right.
and we'll see.
So that might double the viewerage.
No,
Potentially.
no, but
in time.
maybe
In time.
maybe someday over the
as
next
the
10
legend
years,
builds.
we'll
Yeah.
have 10 to 20 viewers.
Great. So until next time, drive safe, and may all your mischief be of the lawful persuasion.